Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. We know it's always fun to bring in some of our seasoned politicos to get inside perspective and strategic thinking about developments both local and national. So today we bring back our dynamic duo in studio, Steve and Steve. Steve Marchand, former mayor of Portsmouth, Steve Negron, two-time nominee for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District. Steve Squared, as we like to call it. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. So, hey, let's jump right into the government shutdown and the big debate over the political fallout. I think both sides always start these things thinking, they're going to blame the other guy, and you never know which way it's going to break. But Steve Negron, your thoughts to start.
Sure, absolutely, Adam. I've been doing government business now for going on almost 40 years, and it's really funny. The last time we had a budget passed was in 1997 on time. So there's a process that's broken, and we need to get back to a point where we can do our job and get it fixed. But this one right here, and a continuing resolution is what they want to do, is those two words are important. Continue the resolution that was passed back in March. And I think what we're seeing right here is that Senator Schumer voted for a CR back in March and got a lot of blowback for that. But since that time, two things happened. Number one, the big, beautiful bill was passed and took away some of the things that I believe the Democrats really wanted in that bill. So I believe Senator Schumer and most of the folks in there are now trying to take a second bite at the apple. They weren't successful by defeating the big, beautiful bill, but they're holding now the continuing resolution hostage to get some of those things they didn't get in the big, beautiful bill into the CR. And the truth of the matter is, all we want to do is maintain the same spending limits from the last continuing resolution now. That's what it's meant by a clean CR. No ads, no deletes, just continue it on. And I think what happened here is, I don't know, there's a lot of people saying that he changed his mind because of a potential challenge in his Senate seat. The bottom line is, both people need to get back to the table, right? The Republicans believe that they put together a clean CR. The Democrats, I think, are trying to take another bite at the apple. And unfortunately, the people that are being affected are the everyday Americans that are out there, both people like the TSA, the military, civil servants. So both parties need to get back to the table, fix this, put your pride away, leave it at the door, and get something signed to continue for another 7 weeks so that they can do the hard work that they're supposed to be doing.
Steve Marchand, you know, a Democratic base wants the Democrats to fight in Washington. They're getting it here, but is it going to blow back on them?
In the short term, until everyday Americans feel it, and the longer this goes on, the more that everyday Americans will begin to say, hey, my life is getting affected now. And that's when the dynamism of this could really change. And I think if either party knows, if they say they know who will be advantaged politically from this, I think it's really hard to say right now. The one thing I would add to much of what Steve said is Schumer, I think in March, thought, we'll give it a chance to see how it goes. The base has gotten even angrier about it, and that's put more political pressure, as you note. But since then, the Trump administration has done an unprecedented amount of executive rescissions. And I think a growing number of Democrats are like, look, if we were to, quote, give in, whether we do or not, he's going to end up trying to do stuff that nobody's ever really done before in terms of these executive level rescissions. So we might as well fight, because otherwise he's just going to take out the things he wants to take out. And the court system right now seems to be very reluctant to push back on that. That is putting additional pressure on Democrats, along with the political pressure you both mentioned, to really go for it in a way that back in March didn't make as much sense.
We'll stay with you, Steve Marchand. Seacoast guy. Another Seacoast guy is looking at the U.S. Senate race, kind of reducing his title there. Former U.S. Senator John E. Sununu. What does his interest in this race do to potentially a already marquee matchup?
It makes it a top-tier U.S. Senate race nationally. And I think Democrats and Republicans are well aware of this. There was some polling that came out recently from the University of New Hampshire. It showed it as a 6-point race. Here's the reality. It's probably a little closer than that. If you look at the numbers, once Sununu formally gets in, which seems like all but certain, the Republican base will probably consolidate a little more than it says in the poll. And when that happens, we're looking at something closer to a tie. Everybody on both sides of the aisle is aware of this. This is going to draw more money, more attention. It's going to be right there with all of the races that we have already been talking about in places like Michigan and elsewhere. This is a top 5 race in the country, could be decisive for the U.S. Senate. I think Democrats feel really good about Chris Pappas being the front runner for that nomination, because Pappas has done a good job in Congress of winning the kinds of voters, these kind of non-MAGA Republican, conservative-leaning independents. He's been able to attract them better than most other Democrats in New Hampshire, and he's probably probably going to have to do that in order to beat somebody of the political stature of Johnny Sununu.
What about, we still have a Republican primary theoretically here. Scott Brown's still out there and could be potentially, if he really tries, a formidable opponent in a primary. What do you think about that?
Well, it's really funny when John E. Sununu jumped in, right? So now the dynamic changed completely, as Steve said. So you got two previous senators, right, that are now vying for this one. I think it raises absolutely the national attention of here. I think the one that's benefiting the most by Johnny Sununu considering getting in is Congressman Pappas, right? Because I think he's a clear front runner for the Democrats out there. And to Steve's point, he's done a great job for his constituents here in New Hampshire CD1. And I think he's just waiting. This is going to be a stalking horse kind of thing. And look, let's face it, there are egos involved, right? Who's the ones that's going to say, you know, I'm out for the better of the party, for the better of trying to win a Senate seat. So it's going to be interesting. And I think the national focus is going to be on, like in Michigan, it's going to be on New Hampshire to see what's going to happen in the New Hampshire primary and then eventually what's going to happen in the general.
But if Scott Brown goes hard after that Trump base, could he create a problem, do you think, for Johnny Sununu?
I do. So certainly if you look at the Sununus, whether it was Governor Chris Sununu or the father or the son, you know, they're more moderate. Right, clearly. And so I think that Scott Brown is really trying to look at how do I hang my hat on the red meat crowd right now and how much of that middle can I make. So Senator Brown is starting over here to the right and bringing the moderates. I think Senator Sununu is trying to start at the middle, and he's going to have to show somebody to get some of the right. So it's a really interesting race on there. So, I mean, all eyes are focused on this race.
One other thing to consider there, Scott Brown has been out on the trail, too, going to the meetings, and you can never discount that. Both of you have done this.
Yes.
Showing up is a big deal, and he's already got a lead on that front. Steve Marchand, the governor's race, you've been thinking a lot about this. You have been writing and saying that you think, even though there's no major Democratic candidate yet, that this is potentially a competitive race.
Right, folks, you can go to stevemarchand.com. Shameless plug. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I have been. Look, I've managed governor's races. I've run for governor. I've worked with governor. I've done everything but be governor. And I'm done trying that for the record. But if you look at Kelly Ayotte's job approval ratings 1 year almost into the job compared to anybody else this century, including Craig Benson early in the 2000s, who was the only one to lose the re-election for the second term in the history of New Hampshire. Her disapprove is already in the 40s. Nobody else, Chris Sununu, Maggie Hassan, John Lynch, Craig Benson, was within half of that number pretty much at this point. It is going to be, and I am not suggesting, some Democrats are saying, hey, put the attention on down ballot because we have admittedly a better chance of winning back the New Hampshire House or maybe the New Hampshire Senate. Of course, it's not a either or. When the gubernatorial candidate is strong, it helps down ballot as well. And so if we Democrats take that race seriously, given the historically high disapproval numbers for Kelly Ayotte, it could be a 5-point race with 2 weeks to go if we put a modicum of attention on it, not at the expense of other things. Last thing I would say, the reason why Kelly Ayotte's numbers are where they are is not necessarily, the polls show, not because of specific disapproval of specific policies. Democrats haven't even really attacked that too much yet. It's because, unlike Sununu, Lynch, even Hassan, the voters see Ayotte not as a unique character, but as a Republican. And in these partisan times, that means it's a pretty close race. Sununu and Lynch had this extra 10 to 15% of voters who saw them as above party politics, and that went from like a 50% approval rating into the stratosphere, the mid-60s for both of them at different points. And Kelly Ayotte simply doesn't have that because they see her as more of a Republican.
And interestingly, Steve, we're seeing on the Republican side, the Trump administration, potentially Corey Lewandowski, talking about primarying Kelly Ayotte, which could give her some separation there.
Right, it's true. And I think what Steve said is absolutely correct. The trick is, who are the Dems going to put up out there that's going to be able to draw from that? And he's absolutely right. The down ballot races are so important too. And a lot of times we get focused on federal races, right? When we live in a state that we have a House and a Senate and an EC that we have to win as well. So with Mr. Lewandowski potentially coming in there, I think it kind of changes clearly the dynamic of where we're at right now. One of the things that people and I talk to is that one of the things about Governor Ayotte is that she's doing exactly what she said she was doing during her campaign. And I know there's been some blowback about redistricting, but she's holding fast to that. I think you have to look at, is Corey Lewandowski going to look at that to try to split the vote? And I think people have to realize that when you do that kind of partisan primary that you make a high-speed lane for somebody else on the outside to come in and take that. So I think all that's going to go into the sausage making, and I think they're going to figure out, okay, you know, Governor Ayotte is not like Governor Sununu or even Governor Lynch, because they were more moderate. They were clearly, and I think Steve's right, they look at Governor Ayotte more as a traditional Republican, but I think it carried her in the last election, and I think she's got the ability to do that again if, in fact, she's not primary.
Oh, and we should point out, Corey Lewandowski has talked about doing this
Right.
before. He's never actually gone through with it, so this is a big we'll see.
Right.
Steve, some interesting first congressional district perspective. You know one of the Republicans who's expected to get in here soon. What do you think about this Anthony DiLorenzo, who we're hearing about getting in the weeks ahead?
So I've known Anthony for over 15 years and have been very friendly with him. This is what I tell all my Democratic friends, many of whom don't really know a lot about him. This would be his first foray into elected politics, I believe. He certainly can self-fund. In these days, that's a very attractive feature in a candidate. He's a serious competitor. He is a competitor in all things, and I mean that as a compliment. Democrats are quickly learning to take the specter of Anthony DiLorenzo running seriously. They should. I can't speak for the other Republicans in the field, obviously. They will have to make their own decision. But I think in addition to a John E. Sununu intensified Senate race, DiLorenzo intensifies CD1, raises the stakes of electability perhaps a little bit more for the Democratic field, where it could be a little less of an ideological decision between the 6 Democratic candidates. It could cause activists to think more like, who has the best chance of beating a formidable Republican nominee?
All right, unfortunately, we've hit time, but I do want to say congratulations to Steve Negron as a Yankee fan. He gets the bragging rights here on Steve versus Steve. Fun series, though. That was a cool
Great series. We'll
Yes, it
get
was.
you next year.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, gentlemen. We appreciate your
You
time.
bet.
And we'll be right back with retired Brigadier General Don Bolduc with his thoughts on that unprecedented military meeting in Washington. Stay with us.